Rachel, thanks very much for coming in today to talk about the ISE exam.
Mm-hmm.
A couple of questions about the ISE, and this is really just to get a broad general understanding about what's involved in it. But the first question, what does ISE stand for?
ISE stands for Integrated Skills in English.
Okay, and the integrated skills, I mean, that probably deserves a little bit of unpacking. Can you tell me what we mean by integrated skills exam?
Well, I think traditionally many exams will examine or test discrete skills, so simply a reading test, a writing test. But we know that in real life, when you're using language skills, you're actually using communicative competencies where these skills need to be integrated. You listen and then report on something you've heard. When you read something, you may do something with that information. So it's trying to integrate the skills so you read and use that information in the writing task.
Okay, and that seems logically to reflect the kind of processes you'd expect to happen in real life. Mm-hmm. At work or university, yeah. You're never simply just reading or just listening or just speaking or just listening.
So it also means that teachers have a reason to teach students the skills they will really need in real life, in academia or at work, so that every task is something that is going to be used.
Sounds like a nice link to constructive alignment and the needs that students have, which is video number 3 in this series of 12. So that's a nice one for people to go back to if they want to learn a little bit about how we can look at the student needs as outcomes, and then take that back to assessment and then back to the teaching and actual lesson outcomes. So quite a positive spin-off for teachers as well, it seems.
Hugely, because it gives teachers a focus, gives them support, it gives a kind of a staging of the skills they're trying to develop. So if you start with the ISE foundation, you're getting those skills very scaffolded and very kind of supported. So it helps you to teach those to your students at that level, so that when they do reach ISE 3, they've got the skills almost as a real life authentic skill.
Sounds good. And just before we go on, I know that this has been produced quite closely with the Common European Framework Reference of languages.
Yes, it's come from there. It's addressing all the requirements and the skills required for different CEFR levels. So it's designed to respond to that.
So I think some exams are mapped, they're created and then they're mapped to the CEFR. But in this case, the ISE has been mapped from the CEFR and the actual production of the tasks.
It literally has been written from the CEFR.
Okay, so it's quite a new exam in that respect.
Oh, yeah.
So I think as we'll go through, we'll see some, talking about this, we'll see some examples of how the CEFR is involved in different stages. Now I know it is integrated, and so it perhaps makes it a little difficult to say, let's talk about speaking, let's talk about listening. But as much as we can, what's the speaking component for the ISE?
Speaking component is, we call it conversation. So the candidate comes into the exam room and has a conversation with the examiner focused on whatever particular grade or level they're entering for.
All right. So it's just a conversation?
It's just a conversation, but obviously it's structured. So the first part of the conversation is a topic the candidate has been able to prepare on a subject that interests them. So they have control and they have personal interest. So they come ready with ideas they want to discuss with the examiner. Now,
my first question, thinking as an examiner, might be, well, if they've come prepared, is that not a bit like cheating? Might they just memorise a whole series of texts and it's not really a conversation then, it's more kind of, I'm going to tell you about this?
I know, because throughout the exam guidance notes, teachers can see that we reiterate, this is not a recitation, this is not a monologue. The candidate must be ready to respond to the examiner, must be ready to give clarification, give explanation. So it's clearly the communicative effectiveness skills they're being asked to fulfil are very clearly about a conversation, not about a monologue.
So the examiner is engaging in that, and
absolutely.
So in that case, the examiner doesn't really know what they're going to say, particularly before the actual exam.
No, but they do know the grade that they're testing. So they have everything prepared as a kind of series of STEM questions and statements, so they can respond to any topic at the level and help the candidate to show the communicative skills and language functions they need.
And I suppose we can say that through that interaction and the kind of, dare I say, a bit of a surprise nature of not knowing what the examiner is going to say, because it will depend on the context or the presentation or the prepared topic, that will reflect actually what happens in real life, because you don't know what someone's going to ask you.
And you don't know what somebody's going to say in response, because examiners don't always ask questions, they simply might respond and make a comment.
Mm-hmm. Of course, yeah.
So then the candidate needs to respond to that comment. That's how a conversation works.
Okay, and I suppose the candidate can then maybe ask the examiner questions as well.
Absolutely, they need to, because depending on the level, they need to take control of the interaction and show they're able to maintain and manage an interaction, not simply leave it to the examiner. And of course, if they can't understand, one of the criteria, one of the rating scale criteria, is that they can ask for clarification, which is what you do in real life.
And they wouldn't be penalised. So if they said, I'm sorry, what do you mean by X? That would be fine.
That wouldn't be penalised at all, that would be brilliant, because that's what you need to learn to do.
It's a recovery strategy that everyone uses in day-to-day English. And just thinking about how this is prepared then in the classroom, because teachers might find it quite difficult to prepare a student for the unknown, let's say. How would teachers go about preparing students for that kind of speaking, where they might just be interrupted in what they're talking about, they will be interrupted?
They can go online and find lots of materials on the Trinity website, but clearly any kind of communicative activity they're using in their course books, in their communicative games activities, where students are just trying to communicate, to do some kind of information gap activity, the students are speaking authentically without trying to simply repeat a memorised grammar sentence. This will be useful practice.
And in that way, I suppose we can say we're looking not just at linguistic competence, but also things like socio-linguistic competence, discourse competence, and able to build a whole range of communicative competencies.
Yes.
All right, that's very interesting, thank you. Can you tell me what's involved in the listening component of the ISE?
You mean the discrete listening task?
Yes, indeed.
Yes, we call it the independent listening task, and this is, again, it's scaffolded and graded, so at lower levels the task is much more framed. Candidates have to listen to a piece of listening text, they need to respond to questions, they need to report information, they need to respond to further questions from the examiner. So they are listening and reporting orally.
I just want to pick up a point. So you said that so the listening takes part within
the speaking.
Within the speaking. So they're joined together. They're
Yes.
not okay. 9 o'clock you've got speaking, 11 o'clock you've got listening.
And it's individual.
It's the same thing.
Yeah, they're in the exam room with the examiner, and it's on an individual level. They're not sitting in a room with 30 other people trying to listen to a tape at the front of the room. So.
Okay, and you said they're responding to the examiner, so the examiner is asking questions based on the listening, and they're then having to do it. So they're not filling in a box saying this is true or false, or it's A, B, C, D.
No. And they can report as an individual, so at IC1 they need to report 6 pieces of information they've heard, and they can report the pieces of information that were easily accessible to them. Another candidate might report different facts, so it is very much each task is individual to that candidate.
And that really sounds like it's quite nice, because it reflects a bit more the listening that we have to do in day-to-day life.
Absolutely.
I was at a talk by John Field at TESOL recently, and he was talking about the problems with traditional teaching or traditional listening tests, where you have to choose A, B, C, D or something, and that just simply doesn't happen. And by focusing on that A, B, C, D type of listening, we're not really preparing students for the listening they're going to encounter, and this sounds like it's preparing students a little better.
My feeling is it's giving students some authentic skills. Although, of course, it's framed in an exam and it can't be exactly like real life, they are developing the skills, and developing skills of guessing, assuming, listening to gist. They're not doing tasks that they don't need to use in real life. We're not taking up and wasting their time doing tasks they will never use in real life.
Okay. All right, good. So that's the listening, and that's the independent listening. That follows on directly from the speaking part. Is there anything else about the listening you'd like to talk about before we move on?
At higher levels it becomes less structured, because at higher levels students or users of English need to have more abstract skills. So we ask them to report on the arguments for and against a talk they've just heard. Maybe they have to understand the speaker's view, whether they agree with the statements or not. So it's much less factual information and much more about understanding of abstract concepts, because that is also what they need to do at B1 and B2 and C1.
All right, thank you. Sounds quite exciting. What about the reading component? How's that dealt with in an integrated manner?
Well, in an integrated manner, the second task in the reading paper is a multi-text reading, and students have either 3 or 4 texts they need to read. They have to select the relevant information. They have various tasks within the reading text, multi-text task, where they need to show skills like skimming, scanning, reading for gist, inferring meaning, again real life skills. They then need to build a summary that synthesises the main points and the relevant points, which they then use in the writing task.
Right, so we've got that kind of integration going through. It sounds quite interesting, the synthesising of that information, the selecting of information. And you said there's a multi-text task.
Yes.
Can you just tell me a little bit more about the multi-text task?
Well, the multi-text task...
It's quite difficult to say, isn't it, multi-text task?
It has different forms of text. One form is an infographic, because we know that now, in the 21st century, people are often reading information in a visual way. They're reading it online, they're reading it on screen. So people are no longer simply reading from a sort of linear text. So they need to learn how to discriminate, how to recognise, how to summarise information in a different format.
I quite like the way that the exam appears to be doing its best to synthesise or replicate what's happening in the real world, so to speak, so that the teaching, if teachers are teaching to the test, and the test is supporting the students outside in their real life communication, then there's this really nice alignment, there's this constructive alignment between what students need, what's being tested, and then what's being taught. Which, incidentally, there's a video on constructive alignment in number 3 in this series of 12, which...
Useful to see.
It's a very good video.
Teachers often comment that students could really do with practicing these skills in their own language, let alone in English. When teachers understand more about ISE, they think this could work for my students full stop, let alone in English.
And there's an extended reading as well, I think.
Yes, it's called the long reading. It's the first task in the exam paper. It's one single text, and students have 3 different tasks they need to do with this text. Again, to allow them to show a variety of reading skills. So it could be skimming, scanning, reading for gist, separating main points from subsidiary points, separating facts from opinion. It really does, again, reflect the kind of reading skills they need to use authentically. And it allows that set of skills to be reported independently as a discrete set of skills, not just their reading into writing.
Right. Okay, thank you. Finally, the writing section of the ISE. You mentioned that they've got to do some writing from the reading. Can you just mention a little bit more about that, just so I fully understand how that works?
The end task in the reading exam is a summary, which they compose a summary from their reading text, from the multi-text. They then use that summary to respond to a question. And the question asks them to use the information and ideas from the text to fulfil some sort of task, depending whether it's an article or a report or whatever. But it's very clearly saying you must use your own language. It's not asking them to lift or cut and paste, because we know students really mustn't do that. They must understand and show they understand by being able to manipulate and use the information they've read, not simply repeat it.
Okay, so that's the reading into writing, and then there's the
extended writing.
The extended writing task.
These are frame tasks, so again we can evaluate and report on discrete writing skills. And we ask students to write a report, an article, a letter. So it gives teachers an opportunity to teach the format of those particular genres of writing. But in both tasks, it gives teachers an opportunity to teach what I would call process writing, this sense of students learning how to be good writers. So they learn about planning, and the exam paper actually has a section that says, please write your plan here.
Do they get assessed on that?
No, it's not assessed at all.
But it's just space within the paper
Yeah.
for them to plan.
And it's sort of reminding students, this is good practice, this is how you become a good writer.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, at the other end of the task, what you need to do is to learn how to proofread your own work and edit it.
I'm sure many of the people who read my emails would suggest I could benefit from that reminder.
Yes, my proofreading skills are terrible. However, if I'd been taught this at school,
Uh-huh.
so it clearly says at the end of the exam, take 2 or 3 minutes to proofread your text. So again, it gives the teacher a reason to teach
Mhm.
a very useful real-life writing skill.
All right. It sounds like a very interesting exam. It's a very new exam as well, we've mentioned. And resources for this, you mentioned there are resources on the Trinity College website,
Yeah.
and that will also be in the further reading section just at the end of the video as well. But Rachel, do you have anything else you'd like to say before we finish off there?
The more I see of the exam, the more impressed I am by it.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.